Hello again. Welcome back as we continue to take a look at archaeological and historical evidences for the biblical reliability of the Bible. For the past couple of weeks, we have looked at historical support for the biblical record from the time of the 6th century BC and the Babylonian captivity of the kingdom of Judah. But what about farther back? For example, does confirmation of the biblical record occur farther back during the time of the divided kingdom? How about as far back as that of the northern kingdom of Israel, which was conquered during the 8th century BC? Did the kings mentioned in the Bible actually exist? In an earlier week, we saw from the prism of Sennacherib how the Assyrian emperor Sennacherib boasted that he shut Hezekiah the Judahite up like a caged bird in Jerusalem. But are there other examples of confirmation of the biblical figures and events from this time period outside of the biblical text? The answer is a definitive yes. With regard to ancient times, we have to depend mostly upon the writings preserved in the archaeological record through such things as clay seals or documents preserved in stone. We don't have the luxury of, for example, having a picture of one of the kings of Israel after all these years. Oh, wait, maybe we do. There's a black limestone sculpture known as the Black Obelisk of Shalmaneser III. Shalmaneser III was an Assyrian monarch who reigned in the 9th century BC from 858 to 824 BC. The obelisk depicts kings from nearby kingdoms bringing tribute and paying homage to the Assyrian ruler. In one scene, we have a person bowing before the emperor, and we have these words beneath it: "The tribute of Jehu, son of, or of the house of Omri. I received from him silver, gold, a golden bowl, a golden vase with pointed bottom, golden tumblers, golden buckets, tin, a staff for a king, and spears." Jehu was a king of the northern kingdom of Israel during the 9th century BC. He is seen here bowing before the Assyrian emperor Shalmaneser. So we have an Israelite king not just mentioned, but pictured, not in Israelite records, but in Assyrian records between 800 and 900 years before the time of Christ. Also of interest is the mention of Omri. Omri was also a king of the northern kingdom of Israel. Although he was a powerful king with extensive temporal influence, and although he extended the area of Israel during his reign, he is seen in the Bible as an evil king who did more evil than all who were before him. His evil ways continued with his first son Ahab, who succeeded him as king. After the reigns of Ahab and that of two sons of Ahab, Jehu became king. Jehu was not one of the children of Omri. He actually usurped the throne and then wiped out the house of Ahab. But the reference on the black obelisk refers not to Ahab or to his two sons who reigned between Omri and Jehu. Instead, it refers all the way back to Omri. The reason appears to be that the obelisk, not just in reference to the Israelite king, but to the kings of the other nations mentioned on the obelisk as well, mentions the name of the king and what kingdom he ruled over. The Assyrians referred to Israel by the name Bit-Humri, which means house of Omri, or Omri land. There are at least 4 later inscriptions under the reigns of 4 different Assyrian emperors in which the northern kingdom of Israel is referred to as either the land of the house of Omri or simply as the house of Omri, the designation obviously referring to the king spoken about in the pages of the Bible. There are quite a few other references in contemporary historical sources to various people mentioned during the period of the divided kingdom. Among a few of the kings mentioned are these: Manasseh of Judah, who reigned during the early 7th century BC. From Esarhaddon's Annals, Esarhaddon being an Assyrian emperor in the early to mid 7th century BC, we read this: "I called up the kings of the country Hatti, and of the region on the other side of the river Euphrates: Baalu, king of Tyre; Manasseh, king of Judah, along with 20 other kings; together 22 kings of Hatti, the seashore and the islands. All these I sent out and made them transport under terrible difficulties to Nineveh, the town where I exercised my rulership, as building material for my palace: big logs, long beams, and thin boards from the cedar and pine trees." The son of Esarhaddon was Ashurbanipal, and he became the next emperor of the Assyrian Empire. In a document known as the Rasam Cylinder, we read this: "During my march to Egypt, 22 kings from the seashore, the islands, and the mainland, Baal, king of Tyre; Manasseh, king of Judah, Servants who belonged to me brought heavy gifts to me and kissed my feet. So we see Manasseh, king of Judah, from the early 7th century BC, also mentioned in Assyrian inscriptions. Another king of Israel that has been mentioned is Jehoash, also known as Joash of Israel, who reigned during the early 8th century BC. Archaeological excavations in what is modern-day Iran found a monument commemorating some of the military accomplishments of an Assyrian emperor named Adad Nirari III. On the monument, which is known as the Tel al-Ramah stele, the emperor boasts about defeating Damascus. After this, he tells of receiving tribute from Israel, Tyre, and Sidon. He mentions by name the Israelite king, who he refers to as Jehoash the Samaritan. Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. The inscription reads, I received the tribute of Jehoash the Samaritan, of the Tyrian ruler, and of the Sidonian ruler. Another king that we read about in other inscriptions outside of the Bible was Ahab, who reigned during the early to mid-9th century BC. In 1861, what is now the country of Turkey, 2 stone monuments known as the Kirk monoliths were discovered. One of them gives information about the reign of Shalmaneser III, a mid-9th century BC Assyrian monarch. In an account of his battle against an allied force of many small kingdoms, we see a reference to 10,000 soldiers belonging to Ahab, the Israelite. There are many other figures from the time period of the divided kingdom that have been confirmed in the archaeological or historical records of the time. From Hoshea, the last king of the northern kingdom of Israel, to a Babylonian named Nebo-Sarsekim, plus many others. Each of them supports the historical accuracy of the Bible. Join us again next week as we continue to look at evidences for the historical reliability of the Bible.